Taijiquan is based upon the ability to make Taijis with your opponent. But just that statement alone gives a little bit of a misleading impression. Taijis, it's not that you weaponize Taijis. They should not be weaponized. They should not be thought of as a mechanism of dominance. They should be thought of as a mechanism of change. Now, when you do any sort of actual fight, what you want is dominance, or ultimately you want to win the fight. But as I said, and also when you become very acquainted with making Taijis with another person, sometimes a person might attack you who knows nothing about Taijiquan or anything. And you might just reflexively, which is what you're supposed to do, reflexively do what you would do with your partner you've been practicing with, and make a Taiji. And that Taiji might be extremely advantageous, and it might essentially weaponize itself and bring about an extremely fortuitous end for you. And you would say, wow, Taijiquan really works. This is really great. But you must understand that is not actually, I mean, it might happen, but that's not what you're depending on. That's not what you're working on. And that's not why you're developing Taijis with your partner. You're not doing it solely for the purpose of just so you can sort of force it on someone else. And in fact, it's very hard to make Taijis unless the other person cooperates. So why are you doing it? You are doing it because it is extremely good to practice change. Now, you might say every martial art has actually ultimately the same method in some sort of abstract, most literal sense, is saying we learn to do certain things and we try them on each other and they either work or they don't, and by experience we get better. I mean, sort of, that's, like I say, that's sort of literally what martial arts do, and it is in a certain sense their method, their fantasy that this is what is going to work. Now you can have all kinds of, other things going on which make that more fortuitous perhaps. But ultimately that's sort of the mechanism by which martial arts proceed. You learn techniques, you try them, you have defenses against them, and so forth. So, as I say, Taiji kind of suffers from the tendency of people to want to turn everything about it into a weapon. And even the making of Taijis itself is not intended to be a weapon. It is intended to help you explore this mechanism of change so that you can enter into this realm of learning in which you literally exchange techniques. So what makes it special? It just, making Taijis with another person produces this extremely rich kind of wealth of techniques and adjustments to techniques. One of the big complaints made by a lot of martial artists is that things that seem to work very well for them when they practice them in the dojo or in the studio or in the monastery or wherever it is with people who are extremely deadly and terrible, and they work fine, and then they practice them with kind of idiots on the street and they don't work as well. And this is because they have not mastered the subtleties of change that you have to make when someone is not doing everything perfectly. So in other words, an imperfect attack actually is more effective simply because they don't know how to deal with anything but a perfect attack. Now, it just so happens that making Taijis with the other person is a kind of super key to adjusting whatever you're doing to whatever the other person is doing, and not being limited to these like perfect forceful attacks that are done exactly the same way every time. So it becomes an extremely functional mechanism by which you can develop the pieces, you might say, that you use to play the game. It's just that it's a extremely wonderful key to this. But many people have objected when seeing my writings and stuff on Taijiquan, in which I elaborately show how to make Taijis with the opponent. They say, well, the only thing wrong with this is that it's too intellectual. I mean, how can you do this when you're fighting? And besides, I never saw anything like this before. I mean, if this is what people have been doing, how come nobody's mentioned it? And I've always made the point of saying that Taiji, it can be analyzed all you want, but that you do not need that analysis for it to function. So today I want to make it clear that there are these kind of two perspectives you can give on Taijiquan. And one of them is extremely intellectual, and that is when you create the image of a Taiji with your opponent. And you can do this. You can do the 2 points that you're in contact and so forth. Mr. Ju used to say, to do Taijiquan, I need 2 points. So you make, like, with 2 points of contact, then you can literally make a Taiji. But the point is, you don't have to actually be thinking about it being a Taiji for it to be one. A Taiji has a certain feeling, and that feeling is based around a balance of pressure. And the word, the sort of in the lexicon of Taijiquan, the technical word for that balance is adherence. So you have to understand, actually, you read about making Taijis all the time when you read anything written by the ancients or whatever, because every time they talk about adherence, they are talking about making a Taiji with the opponent. That is to say, so in other words, what is the mechanism of this? So if you want to perceive it yourself, you can sort of look at it as a Taiji that, like I say, you can say, well, here's what I call the wooden ball, when you have 2 points of contact with the opponent, and they're balanced around the fulcrum so that you try to keep the pressure the same. Now, remember, it's extremely important that everything remain dynamic. There's a classic that says, in motion it separates, in stillness there's fusion. So you don't want fusion. And one of the reasons you don't want fusion in your practice is because when people are fighting you, they don't stand still. They do stuff. So there's always movement. So you must always think of this as a dynamic thing. And this is one of the biggest problems of people trying to make a balance. When you make a balance, sometimes it's spoken of as like if you lose your balance and you sort of stick a foot out and you're kind of like hit this like rigid position. You say, I got my balance back. But that's a very different kind of balance than to think about the balance that it takes to balance a ball under the end of your finger. In that case, you have to move it around constantly, like this, right? Okay, now if you have 2 points, okay, well, you still have a problem, but it's confined to a certain dimension. Now the ball can slip off one way and it can slip off the other way. They can still slip off, but you have to a certain extent, like, focused it. If you have 3 points, then you have something that, you know, defines a plane, and the ball will not fall off of 3 points. So if you have 3 points, you can do this. So Mr. Ju might have said, you know, just as correctly, to do Taijiquan, I need 3 points. But one of those points is quite not difficult. Well, it takes practice and it takes real study to get. And this is the point where between your feet. And the way this is measured is, think of pressure, equalizing pressure as the analogy to making Taijis. So you can think about this and you can practice it without any kind of abstraction in your mind at all. So this is why, you know, generations of Taiji masters could be produced who do Taiji perfectly and have no real concept of Taiji in the way that I always present it, as this actual physical Taiji that you make with the other. But they would be making these Taijis. In other words, if I balance the pressure on a dynamic level between 2 points of contact with you, I am making a Taiji. If I take the fulcrum of that Taiji and I balance it with a point directly down on the floor, that is making another Taiji. But you feel that pressure not at the point on the floor. Okay, this might be helpful to you. If you make a Taiji with the opponent and you make what I call the airball Taiji, which is when you have 2 points and then you have, you balance that with the floor, that point is in front of you. It's between you and the opponent. And the center of this air ball is between you and the opponent, exactly halfway. But the place that you feel the pressure is not at that point. You feel the pressure in your feet. So this actually was a problem for me for a long time, because I unconsciously confused those two things. So understand, this is one sense in which the visual image of a Taiji that you can make with the opponent is going to be a little bit misleading in terms of the actual point that you feel the pressure appear in your feet. So again, if you want to be skillful, you want to replace this intellectual concept of the Taiji with a feeling. Now, the feeling depends on how many points you have. Okay? If you have only one point of contact with the opponent, you are adhering a surface. And I always make a point of this to say you have to feel like you are exactly perpendicular to the surface that you are in contact with. And that perpendicularity is the equivalent of if you had your hand on the person, all points of the hand being of equal pressure. So in other words, the word adherence is a good word for this concept. But when you have 2 points, then the points are balanced, but they seem like they're in balance around a central fulcrum, but that fulcrum is not fixed. It feels free to go up and down between the two players. So it's as though you have a line, you have a line between the 2 points that you have in contact with. And that line is always fluctuating back and forth, keeping balance of pressure. And it also is free to move up and down like this, right? So this is the feeling of adhering a line. And as I say, it's kind of an easy thing to duplicate. You can just have someone hold up a kind of pole or a stick, and you can take another stick and cross it. And you can feel like this, oh, this is what it feels like to adhere a line. And remember, it's not this line. It's this line. You're adhering the line that's formed between, it's this stick, the horizontal one. That's the adherence, okay? Now, when you combine this pressure with pressure on your feet, and the exact nature of this pressure is kind of esoteric because it balances between the feet depending on where your center is. But that's another question. Let's just assume that we know how to make this into one point that follows. So you feel 3 points. You feel the 2 points. They might be your hands. They might be an elbow. They might be any point technically. So those 2 points. And then you feel this point in between your feet. So you feel 3 points. When those 3 points feel like they are perfectly balanced in pressure, you have defined a plane, a kind of plane surface. Now, you could teach someone to find this feeling without any abstraction or any concept of a Taiji whatsoever. And he could find this feeling in his practice. You can make a child understand this. In fact, this particular feeling is a little bit, it defies abstraction a little bit because it doesn't quite make sense, because a plane is something that's completely flat. So your imagination would be like 3 points, 1, 2, 3, and then that defines the plane, something like this. But in this case, one of the things that you're touching is perpendicular to the other thing that you're touching. So you have these 2 points here, and then you have this thing under here. But if you don't think about that, if you just say, no, I'm not going to try to visualize this plane. I'm just going to say, maybe I can visualize it, but I just visualize it as point, and a point, and I'm going to see this as this flat surface that I am sort of pressed up against. That is adherence. That level of adherence is extremely advanced. And the thing about the classics is they talk about adherence, but they don't really give it, they don't give notice of these different levels of adherence. And so the only time of adherence you usually see is this 1 point adherence, where you have, like, the teacher is adhering the student, or the student is trying to adhere to the teacher, and the teacher gets away. So it's all this 1 point stuff. But when you file all 3 points, then you are actually defining Taijis, even if you've never heard of them and don't know what they are. So the point is, as soon as possible, as you're doing this, you want to replace this abstract idea of a Taiji. You want to replace it with this clinging to this adherence, clinging to this, you want to replace it with the desire to keep these points the same pressure all the time. And in this case, when a person moves away from you or he moves his center in some way, you feel like the third point of the plane is disappearing. You feel like the plane is like sliding out from under you or something. So you literally step in whatever way it's necessary to maintain your adherence. And if you follow the other rules of your technique, this will give rise to extremely accurate steps. Much more accurate than if you just follow the person, just trying to sort of follow his center. But in other words, adherence, the actual feeling of adherence, is the actual key to actually making Taijis.